When comes my numbered day, I will meet it smiling, for I have kept this oath. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I will be talking about the Ringsworn Trilogy by Howard Andrew Jones, which consists of For the Killing of Kings, Upon the Flight of the Queen, and When the Goddess Wakes, all of which I think are pretty solid covers. I still love the last one here. And I recently finished this one. I did the first two books pretty close together, and then I just got done with the third one here right at the end of March. And so kind of wanted to talk about the trilogy as a whole. So this is following a group of Altenori, which is like this core of powerful warriors and some often mages as well. And this group that like directly supports the queen of this country and are kind of powerful there. And the first book opens up with the plot being that the magical sword that is supposed to be the only thing that can slay the king of this like warring tribe basically is missing, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, and then goes from there. But while we do kind of start with that, the plot ends up being quite a lot bigger on, and there's betrayal and a bigger plot to go along, including the goddess as so named in the third book as well, which comes into play, and more of an exploration into magic and kind of everything else going on there as well. And the first book, I feel like I read it at the right time, but I had so much fun with it. It was really nice as kind of just something different, very sword and sorcery-esque, had a lot of humor in it, and so I had a great time with that book. And while I did enjoy books 2 and 3, I did feel like it was a little bit of diminishing returns for me just because you really kind of lose the humor in the second 2 books. Things get a lot more serious and it's not necessarily a bad thing, I want to say either, because very specifically, book 1 had a lot of humor, but it also had a lot of characters that had a lot of flaws or immaturity, and book 2 sees them kind of grow and realize what's going on, and times become more serious, and so they have to kind of step it up. And so for character growth, it works really well with book 2, but kind of losing a little bit of humor, I was a little bit sad on. The other thing that's a little odd with this is the setup of the first book. Wow. Once again, is accurate, I guess, to kind of what's going on. It has a lot less bearing on like the trilogy as a whole than you would think for the start of it, or at least it's maybe it's just so it's not revealing quite away what's going to be happening. But thinking back on the events of the first book, there's some that are really relevant, but a lot of things just kind of like, in the first book, the big thing they need to do, once they get it done, well, now they have a bigger problem. In book 2, they have a big thing they need to do. Once they get that done, now they have an even bigger problem. And then we get to book 3, where we have the biggest problem, and the ending felt a little bit rushed to me. I do feel like these are all pretty short books, as you could probably see. But if you look, book 1 is fairly short, book 2 is a little bit longer, but then book 3 is actually the shortest of all. And I'm not quite sure why. It resolves things and has a satisfactory ending, but it did just, some of the really big things felt a little bit rushed. And it's where, once again, even though elements that become relevant have been around, this series did do a little bit of the things coming a little too easy to the characters sometimes. And now I think for the kind of series this is, with it, especially like I said, with it being more sword and sorcery, is sometimes something you can just see where, this is more about the characters and the plot and the overall thing versus like how every little bit of it happens and that sort of thing. And so I think it's not anything that's like, oh, this is bad, but it's, also not like the best thing when you have that happening quite a lot. I feel like the humorous tone would have made me a little more forgiving, though, which is why I kind of brought that up. Now, I don't want to make it sound like I didn't like these books or anything like that, because I did really enjoy this. This is a solid series for me. I think, like, as a trilogy overall, probably goes about to 4 stars for me. So, pretty solid. Not anything, like, mind-blowing, but fun, fairly short books that were easy to get through and were just kind of nice as a palate cleanser, kind of different thing to get through, and I think fill that void pretty well. it is an interesting world, and the characters I do particularly like. And I mentioned that with the first book because we have a wide variety of characters that are very different, and seeing them all interact with each other and kind of clash, and then seeing how they grow and how their opinions of each other change, I think is handled really, really well. And that's why in book two, even though I lost a little bit of the humor, the character growth and the changes to those characters were really, really well realized, and I appreciated it because, like, you have a character in the first one who's just kind of like, all he's thinking about is like girls and sex and this and that. He's super immature about everything, and he's kind of realizes like, oh, I'm gonna have to actually get it together. And we have the very intelligent but awkward character who nobody really likes her, and she's just kind of like looked as like, oh, you're odd, and we see how important she becomes as the story continues on. And so we have a lot of that, and we also have the idea of kind of like the already well-known heroes, and then the new people coming in and trying to become heroes as well. Different cultures, different setup of the world as well, and so it does set up an interesting world. The thing here, and this is apparently inspired from the Chronicles of Amber, but there's like there's stable places, and then there's the shifts, which is this kind of like shifting magical landscape that has a lot of storms and is really dangerous to travel through, which is pretty relevant. And then we've got some kind of different parts of magic as well, including hearthstones, which allow magic users to really, really amplify their power and are pretty relevant here as well. The other thing I'll mention, though, with the magic is I do feel like you don't get a lot of explanations. Once again, I feel like to some extent, with sword and sorcery, having a softer magic system does usually make sense. That's kind of what you get. You're not really getting hard magic, and so I think makes sense. And this is really modern sword and sorcery 100% too. And so a lot of the things I mentioned that were a little bit of a negative for me, not a huge negative, but a little bit of negative. If you're looking for a sword and sorcery one and just kind of a fun, quick series, might not bother you whatsoever at all, and I think it's totally fair. But the magic, I could have dealt with a little bit more explanation, because there were a lot of things with it where it's just like, we don't really know what these do or why, and things just kind of exist as they need to, either to be a problem that it's magical problem and they can't overcome it, or a solution to other problems with the magic. So it does go both ways. It's not like they can just magic their way out of any situation. There are a lot of situations that magic is used to specifically not let them do that. But there are definitely some things that are just not explained super well. And we get like a little bit of explanation on some things that are going on throughout the series, but not a ton. And just my personal preferences, I like to have a little bit more of that explanation as well, even though it's not necessarily necessary. And like I said, in this sort of series, I can absolutely see why we don't get a ton of that. But it's like I said, a solid series here. About 4 stars across the board is kind of where I ended up. Book 1 is still my favorite, but a lot of great things happened in Book 2, and Book 3 had some cool and very satisfying things in it as well. With the ending, it did some really nice things that kind of shows you a lot of just the culmination of a lot with the book. So it does a really good job with having a lot fit in and a lot of action fit into 3 fairly short books, especially with book 3 being pretty short. And so a really solid series. I definitely, like I said, recommend, especially if you're looking to try something a little bit different, or if you're actually, you read a lot of sword and sorcery, or you're interested in trying a kind of more modern sword and sorcery, and what I've talked about sounds interesting, definitely recommend these check out. But I thought they worked pretty well. It's just kind of a nice palate cleanser, change of pace. It's something I enjoyed and had a good time through. I did do a mix of physical and audio for these as well, and the audio was kind of solid. I do feel like the audio somehow got a little bit worse as it went along, though, because like the third book, the parts I did audio, it seemed like the narrator changed the voices, or like almost do the wrong voice in some scenarios for certain characters, so that was kind of weird. But it didn't bother me that much, because with switching through and with being familiar with what was going on, it was kind of neither here nor there, but I figure I'll mention that as well, just because that was kind of a weird little quirk of book 3 primarily with it. But did a mix there to get through and everything, and so, but yeah, had a pretty good time with this one. Definitely let me know if you've read this, or if you are interested in checking this series out. I think the author has another series I'd heard not much about either, but this was a kind of fun, quick and easy one to get through and read. So that's really it for the Ringsworn trilogy and my thoughts on that. So make sure to give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the link in the description, as always, for the Wizardly Do a Discord if you want to chat books, whether these books, other books, any books, really anything at all. It is a lot of fun and we'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.